Shortcomings in President Biden's energy thinking were on display this week. The consequences are serious and, in one case, deadly. Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, and this is What's Ahead, where you get the insights you need to better navigate these turbulent times. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg made telling statements this week that revealed deep flaws in how the Biden administration sees the energy world. At an event celebrating the trucking industry, the transportation chief declared that even if we achieved energy independence, oil prices could still go sky high because the cost would be enormously impacted by factors and events all around the world. By contrast, he declared, if we were self-sufficient with so-called renewables, prices would be smooth and all would be well. The secretary is spouting nonsense. If the White House didn't wage an unending war against fossil fuels, production would be far higher and we wouldn't be tapping the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to make up the shortfall. Before Biden, the U.S. was turning out 13 million barrels of oil a day. Now it's 11.5 million. Oil has been particularly volatile for over a half century. The reason? A dollar that is steadily losing value since the U.S. went off the gold standard in the early 1970s. Oil then was around $3 a barrel. Then came the great inflation of that era. As the dollar weakened, oil took off like an Elon Musk rocket, peaking at almost $40 a barrel. It wasn't that oil was getting more valuable, but the greenback was shrinking. When inflation was tamed, petroleum plummeted. The same thing occurred in the early 2000s. The dollar lost value and oil went up fivefold. As for renewables, Buttigieg seems oblivious that windmills require a vast amount of minerals to be constructed, like cobalt, copper, lithium, iron ore, and nickel. Newsflash for the secretary, these things swing violently in price. Moreover, in an inflationary environment, costs for labor, electricity, and transportation and more all go up. Fossil fuel alternatives are no more exempt from higher prices than oil and gas. Secretary Buttigieg and other administration officials also touted new regulations mandating 49 miles per gallon for light trucks and passenger vehicles by 2026, 33% higher than they are now. This is absurd. There's no way auto manufacturers can achieve such an average unless the sale of electric vehicles increase more than fivefold. The new standards are a way to force automakers to somehow force more EV sales. It won't work. Electric vehicles typically cost at least $10,000 more than their gas-using counterparts. And many people don't cotton to the lengthy time it takes to recharge. And how else do manufacturers try to reach higher mileage standards? The way they've been doing it since mileage standards were started back in 1975, primarily by making vehicles lighter. And here we get to the unspoken cost. Lighter cars are less crash-worthy, a factor that has literally cost tens of thousands of lives. And sadly, there's no chance this administration will stop it. I'm Steve Forbes. Thanks for listening. Do send in your comments and suggestions.
I must admit to being exasperated by the President's response to two very important issues. I don't understand why he won't drill for our own oil. And I don't understand why he wants to let the Iranians get a nuke. There's news on both issues, and I still don't get it. America's top banker, Jamie Dimon, told the President face to face, we need a Marshall Plan to produce more of our own energy. He wants leadership from the federal government, not roadblocks. It was the American Marshall Plan that rebuilt Europe after World War II. Dimon wants to rebuild our energy production. Why, oh why, won't the President do it? Next question. Why is the President so determined to do a nuke deal with the Iranians? We are told a deal is imminent. Why are we doing this? A deal lets Russia build a nuclear power plant in Iran. It gives the Russians much of Iran's enriched uranium. It gives the Iranians tens of billions of dollars to finance terrorism, and it poses a threat to Israel's existence, not to mention thoroughly annoying our allies in Saudi Arabia. The New York Times, repeat, the New York Times columnist Bret Stephens says this, a new Iran deal leaves us meeker and weaker. Why won't we drill? Why give the mullahs a nuke? I just don't get it.
Mr. Speaker, Madam Chairman, I rise to oppose the previous question so that we can immediately consider H.R. 6858, the American Energy Independence from Russia Act. That would not only strengthen our security and independence, it would lower gas prices by approving the Keystone Pipeline, removing restrictions on LNG exports, restarting production on federal lands and water, and overall encouraging more American energy development. In the midst of skyrocketing inflation and surging prices at the pump, along with the geopolitical context where Europe is dependent on Russian oil and gas, you would think the Biden administration would abandon their whole-of-government approach to targeting American energy production. Since Biden took office, he's used every tool at his disposal to undermine the oil and gas industry and our energy independence along with it. In addition to the onslaught of his unilateral attacks, his first presidential budget was released and called for $35 billion in punitive tax increases on the oil and gas industry. And his administration has weaponized and abused their regulatory authority to attack the industry at every turn. SEC reports, FERC permitting, OMB directives, EPA radical regulations. But what's more astonishing is Biden's latest budget, which is $4 trillion in taxes, includes $45 billion in taxes on oil and gas. These are the same provisions that his own party rejected and had to abandon their Build Back Broke proposal. So Just like he's done with the regulatory regime, it appears our president's weaponizing the tax code to cancel an entire sector of our economy, one that is paramount to our prosperity and security. As events around the world constrain supply, he seems hell-bent to ensure that anyone but American energy producers, the most efficient, cleanest producers in the world, are positioned to supply the United States and our people and our allies around the world. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Plan to increase oil production in America.
Oh my God, that is hilarious. Would that I had the magic wand on this.
They do.
Yeah.
The thing is, they do have the magic
Pipeline.
wand. Keystone Pipeline, decreasing. So I saw people in the chat saying, Jordan, the permit, it doesn't take that long. It's not that it takes so long to put these rigs in place. It's to get the permits. Even if you've got a permit for your land, you got to get new permits and all this studies done to actually get it done. You'd have to ramp that up, cut the red tape.
She's the Secretary of Energy.
When you are dealing with Democrats,
it's unreal.
you are dealing in the bureaucracy that they love.
And they love bureaucracy.
That's the king of red tape. And, it was Donald Trump who cut through that red tape and said, unleash America's power. And it took his administration was only 4 years. And it was done. We were energy independent. We were exporting energy. We had so much we could be a seller like Saudi Arabia. Now we're going to go beg the Saudis, beg the Venezuelans. We haven't got into it yet more on the Iran nuclear deal. So, yeah, you've got to be trading your Russian oil and gas out for the number one exporter of terrorism in the world, oil and gas from Iran.
How we get to this place. It's a bad place to be. We did not want to be in this place where Putin invaded his own country. And on top of everything else going on with Ukraine and all the other stuff, energy prices, et cetera, it's pretty bad. Before that, November of 20, you see that? That was when we had the election. And then January of 21 is when Joe Biden is installed president of the United States. And gas prices have gone bananas since then. Gas prices, of course, these are the barometer, the real barometer of what actually is going on in the country, right? Like when things are going pretty well and the economy's pretty stable, gas prices are basically pretty low. And now we are watching them explode. So you don't have to know everything about macroeconomics. You don't have to know everything about supply chain or anything else to understand why gas prices and trucks need to move things. People need to drive to work. Like that gas, in essence, is the fuel of the economy, for lack of a better phrase. So prices are completely blowing up right now. Now, why would they be blowing up? Is this all just because of what's happening? Just because, as Joe Biden said, Vladimir Putin invaded Russia? Could it all just be because of that? Or could there be something else a bit more nefarious going on here? Well, here's Biden's energy secretary, Jennifer Granholm, talking about how we have to transition out of gas. But what? When did that happen?
But the bottom line is that this president and this administration are looking at every single tool to shield American families from the impact of rising energy prices. And we're working through an energy transition. And we've got to start by adding energy. And the reality is we have to take some time to get off of oil and gas. We recognize this. This is a transition.
You see what she just did right there? She said the quiet part out loud. Lady, first off, they're using every single tool. Well, no, they're not using every single tool. They're basically not using any of our tools. We're now talking to Iran about getting oil. We're talking to Venezuela about getting oil. We are not talking to Texas. We're not talking about the Keystone Pipeline that Biden closed, right? We're not doing the things that would make us energy independent, which we easily could be. Everyone knows this. We'll get more to that in a few minutes. Everyone knows this. We are not doing every single thing we can. But what she said there was about the transition. That's the interesting thing, this energy transition. And now I think, ladies and gentlemen, we are peeling the onion a little bit. And what we're going to find is this thing really stinks.
And why the price of gas is going up is not because of steps the president has taken. They are because President Putin is invading Ukraine. And that is creating a great deal of instability in the global marketplace.
Really, Jen? Really? You're not going to believe this. We did a little research. And gas prices actually rose $1.14 from Biden's inauguration to the day Putin invaded. That is also according to Statista. So what she's saying right now is you're seeing gas prices rise. They're rising, but it's because of that Putin guy. You know, he's in charge of Russia, and the old man said he invaded Russia, and that's why, except for the year plus that Joe Biden has been president, gas prices were already rising, and we were not doing anything to rely on ourselves. So we are buying, just really understand this right now. And really, not only really understand it, but then really think about what's really going on here. It's like we are buying gas from Russia while Russia is attacking Ukraine. Now, you could say we should have nothing to do with any of this. We should be completely independent. We shouldn't have anything to do militarily with any of this. We can have all of those conversations, but just know what we're doing and that our leaders are just lying to us about why prices are going up.
Let's go. When inflation is where it's at, when you see gas prices going where it's at, we can talk about a jobs report here. We can talk about the latest PCE numbers of the CPI, and all of us former Bloomberg reporters can really get into the weeds, right? But there's one number that they can't really change right now, and that is what the placard says at the local gas station. Yeah. And that number is high, and that's a daily jobs report that voters, that Americans, consumers see every day, and there's nothing the White House can do about it other than bring down the price of gasoline. Which
and maybe blame Putin. And this week the tagline was the Putin price hikes or something to that effect.
Look, when I drive past gas stations that say blame Putin more than they say let's go Brandon, I'll know the the White House, I know the White House has been successful in messaging it.
That is fascinating in its own right. But like, take a look at this Quinnipiac poll. Americans just don't buy that this is related to the war in Ukraine, and most of it, frankly, is not. 41% say it's Biden's policies, just 24% say the war in Ukraine. 24% also say, the oil and gas companies are raising prices. But the White House is trying to do both. Blame Putin, blame the oil and gas companies, but Americans just don't agree.
Yeah, they're trying to also, as you said, put this on oil and gas companies, put this on price gouging. They also have been trying to explain throughout it all that this is part of coming out of a recession and part of coming out of what the pandemic wrought. And Americans, though, feel as though even though wages are increasing, that they're not increasing to the pace that prices are increasing. And so that's the difficulty there. I also think part of that Democratic gap in enthusiasm has a lot to do with Biden's stalled agenda. When you talk to Democratic voters, they bring up the fact that he hasn't done anything on student debt. They bring up the fact that nothing has happened on voting rights. Young voters, Biden's numbers have dropped by double digits with young voters, and they were a big part of his coalition in 2020. They helped him in states like Georgia and in Arizona. And the biggest issue that they care about is climate change.
The Biden administration's assault on oil and gas production began during his campaign when he pledged during the debate. And I want you to look at what he said. He said, quote, "No more drilling on federal lands. No more drilling, including offshore. No ability for the oil industry to continue to drill. Period. Ends." That's what he promised the American people. And you know what? He delivered on that promise. His first day in office, he canceled the Keystone Pipeline. The next week, he halted all federal oil and gas lease sales, stopping development on the part of the economy that produces 24% of America's energy. On May 7th, Biden's Interior Department announced plans prohibiting oil and gas production on 30% of U.S. federal land. On June 1st, Biden revoked leases on the North Slopes of Alaska, totaling 16 billion barrels of oil in stranded production. On October 7th, Biden eliminated Trump's permit streamlining regulations. On October 29th, Biden's Interior began using the, quote, social cost of carbon in permitting, which is a new kind of analysis never enacted by Congress designed to get to know and denied permits. And then on March 21st, just a few weeks ago, Biden's Security and Exchange Commission announced a new regulation aimed at reducing investment in oil and gas, cutting off capital for drilling. Supply and demand has been how prices have been set from the dawn of time. Supply and demand still operates. The Biden administration has waged a war on supply, and prices have skyrocketed. This is not an accident. This is not Putin. This is Joe Biden and the Democrats in the Green New Deal, and they're desperately looking for a political excuse to blame somebody else for the consequences of what they promised they would do to the American people.
Every American is suffering. There is no question. Joe Biden's policies have been an unmitigated disaster, both at home and abroad. As a result, Joe Biden is now the most unpopular president in the modern era. Now, you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who approves of his performance in office. Yesterday, look at this crowd. A handful, 30 people showed up to the president's big publicized speech in New Hampshire. Can you imagine if Donald Trump held an event and only 30 people showed up? What would the media reaction be then? In cost, Biden pumped trillions of dollars into what is an already hot economy, much of it in the name of climate change alarmism.
Oil and gas. He also blames Putin for price increases that began before the war in Ukraine.
Keeping you informed.
Everything on Putin. The American people are aware of Joe Biden's war with American oil. On his first day in office, he canceled a key permit for the Keystone XL pipeline, citing environmental concerns. I know you've taken almost 80 legal actions, Leslie, against the president due to this dangerous policy agenda. You've sued him for his effort to cancel the Keystone pipeline, offshore and public lands drilling permits. But I want to get into the nuts and bolts about the impact on people, because Neil is with us today, and he was a worker on that Keystone pipeline. And give us your sense of what this means for jobs.
Well, it's not looking good right now. You know, the administration.
The United States is targeting the main artery of Russia's economy. We're banning all imports of Russian oil and gas and energy. That means Russian oil will no longer be acceptable at U.S. ports, and the American people will deal another powerful blow to Putin's war machine. This is a move that has strong bipartisan support in Congress and, I believe, in the country. Americans have rallied to support their Ukrainian people and made it clear we will not be part of subsidizing Putin's war. We made this decision in close consultation with our allies and our partners around the world, particularly in Europe, because a united response to Putin's aggression has been my overriding focus, to keep all NATO and all of the EU and our allies totally united. We're moving forward with this ban, understanding that many of our European allies and partners may not be in a position to join us. The United States produces far more oil domestically than all the European countries combined. In fact, we're a net exporter of energy. So we can take this step when others cannot. But we're working closely with Europe and our partners to develop a long-term strategy to reduce their dependence on Russian energy as well. Their dependence on Russian energy as well. Their dependence on Russian energy as well. Their dependence on Russian energy as well.
Take a look.
I mean, it's hard to make plans when you've got an administration that's trying to crush your future.
Мною подписан указ, который устанавливает правила торговли российским природным газом с так называемыми недружественными государствами. Мы предлагаем контрагентам из таких стран понятную и прозрачную схему. Чтобы приобрести российский природный газ, они должны открыть рублевые счета в российских банках. Именно с этих счетов будет вестись оплата газа, поставленного начиная с завтрашнего дня, с 1 апреля текущего года. Если же такие платежи не будут производиться, будем считать это неисполнением обязательств со стороны покупателей, со всеми вытекающими последствиями. Нам никто ничего бесплатно не продает. И мы тоже не собираемся заниматься благотворительностью. То есть действующие контракты будут остановлены. Вновь подчеркну, в ситуации, когда финансовая система западных стран используется как оружие, когда компании из этих государств отказываются исполнять контракты с российскими банками, предприятиями, физическими лицами, когда активы в долларах и евро замораживаются, использовать валюты этих стран не имеет смысла.
He wanted to ban fracking, but when pushed, he did say he wanted to phase it out. Phil Flynn just brought up the fact that the energy industry is roughly 8% of GDP. I'll add to that, it represents roughly 10 million jobs in this country when alternative energy is only about 500,000 at this point. When Joe Biden is sort of looking at this, he's sort of missing the forest through the trees, don't you think?
Well, I think he's missing a key point. Energy is the lifeblood of this country. And what the oil industry does is produce the molecules for natural gas and produce the molecules that turn into diesel, fuel, gasoline, etc. Before we had fracking and before we advanced from 5 million barrels a day production domestically in 2005 to 12 million barrels a day in 2019, we were under the control of the Saudis and OPEC on the price and availability of oil. What Joe is proposing is to put us back under the control of OPEC because we will not be able to produce enough domestic energy. And the transition we're talking about to electric vehicles is going to take, who knows, 20, 30, 40 years? I've seen statistics and studies that say half of the cars in 2050 will be electric. Well, that means there's still hundreds of millions in this country alone and billions of cars around the world still need oil. I think for Joe Biden to take over the control and the regulation of the energy industry is dangerous because he doesn't know anything about energy to start with. But you don't pass along high costs of limited energy to the poorest in the nation and expect them to be happy about it.
Yeah,
the way the Democrats will lose out big time is by raising gasoline prices to unaffordable levels.
You bring up a great point, and when it comes to OPEC specifically, there was a time in this country's history where the Middle East basically owned us because of their energy output. Now we are one of the top producers globally. We are exporting energy, and we are energy independent, as the president pointed out last night. Certainly there is a way, and he's not saying, President Trump, to not invest in alternative energies. He just understands that it's going to take a long time to get there, and in the meantime, you have to keep those 10 million people employed.
Everyone in the industry, and I'm part of it, speaks about the great energy transition of the 21st century. But it's going to take the century to pull it off because nobody understands the scale, the size, the fleet that's out there, the need on a 24/7, 365 basis.
Instead, invest in research and development of renewable resources.
The oil company's not going to go out of business at all.
Texas Republicans saw a gift when Biden said at the last presidential debate that he would transition away from oil and gas.
Joe Biden wants to kill the oil and gas industry.
Governor Greg Abbott's campaign dropped a digital ad Tuesday saying Biden is bad for oil, bad for Texas, and warning of 400,000 lost jobs.
A lot of oil companies are saying they have to transition away from oil.
Michael Weber, deputy director of the UT Energy Institute, says major oil and gas producers are already spending hundreds of billions of dollars investing in renewable resources.
That doesn't mean oil doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that these policy statements aren't relevant. It means they don't have the same impact as they used to.
President Trump will not be visiting Texas before Election Day. Former Governor Rick Perry said that's because Texas is not a battleground state. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick predicted for months that Trump would win here by more than his 9-point margin in 2016. Now he's revising down.
The race is going to be somewhere, I think, between
4 and 8 or 4 and 9. It's just, again, massive turnout, the biggest ever we've had.
We have a shot, but I think the Democrats are going to win back the House. We got some really good candidates running as well. So I feel good about Texas.
Vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris will make stops in Houston and Dallas on Friday, while the Trump campaign bets on Texas to stay red on its own. John Engel, KXAN News.